guys, so today we are doing chapter 10, lesson 4 in your math book. So you should be open to page 651. This is a hands-on lesson, so that means we aren't going to do it the regular way where I kind of show you a review thing and then we do examples, guided practice, independent practice, and then yeah, but it's basically the same, everything just has different names. So what we're going to do first is, I don't have it up here because I wanted to go ahead and just have everything ready. Let's read the sentences under the title together. Actually, I think it's one sentence. So read it in your head while I read out loud. You can write a decimal as a fraction. Both a decimal and a fraction show part of a whole. We know that. If we have a fraction circle, and I break it into, I'm going to do this is not going to look the greatest, but I'm going to try to break it into 10 pieces. Let's see, they're probably not going to be equal, but we'll pretend. So there's 4, 6, 8, and then 9 and 10, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, 10. Remember, we always count whenever we draw a picture of breaking something up, we always count to make sure we have the right amount. So here's my fraction circle, and say I have one piece shaded. Well, that looks like 1/10. Now I'm going to draw a tenths grid. Uh-oh, I'm going to need a new marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then if I shade one of those pieces of that tenths grid, I know that that looks like the decimal 1/10. And those actually mean the same thing. That's what we're going to talk about today, how this and this mean the same exact thing. But first, I'm going to get a new marker. Okay, so everybody, finger or pencil on the draw it, and then follow along. It looks like it might be kind of blurry on the video. I'm sorry, I don't know why. I'm not sure how to fix it, so just try to listen and follow along as best you can. So what we're going to do is we're going to write 4/10 as a fraction with a denominator of 10. So step 1, we're going to write the decimal in the place value chart. Well, we know that there is nothing in the ones place, so we're going to put a 0 there. Then we have our decimal point, and our decimal is 4/10. So we put a 4 in the tenths place, and remember, when we say a decimal, we say the whole number unless it's 0. Then we say the entire number after the decimal point. And then at the end, we say the place that the last digit is in. So we know that 4/10 means that there's nothing in the ones place, there's only a 4 after the decimal point, and that last digit is in the tenths place. So that's how we know this is how we write 4/10 with nothing in the hundredths place. We would not do this because that is unnecessary. That's like putting a 0 at the beginning in the very first place of a whole number, which we don't do. Now number 2 says, shade the grid to represent 4/10. Well, we know by looking that this is a tenths grid. If we want to show 4/10, then that means we need to shade 4 out of the 10 equal pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are 2 ways that we've been learning in this chapter so far to write 4 out of 10. But there's another way, and we already know this because we did 2 whole chapters on this. Now we're going to write it as a fraction. Well, we know if we have the words 4/10, then we know that what it looks like is a 4 in the denominator spot, a 4 in the numerator spot, and a 10 in the denominator part. Because we have 4 out of 10, we have 4 shaded pieces out of 10 total pieces. So that means this decimal, this model, and this fraction all show the same amount of space. They all show 4 out of 10 equal pieces. Because we can think as 4/10, as the words 4/10, or the fraction 4/10. They all mean the same thing. Now we can check with a number line. We know here we have a 0 at the beginning and a 1 at the end, so we're breaking that whole into pieces. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we know that number line has been broken into 10 equal pieces. The decimal 4/10 goes right here. And let's imagine if this was a fraction number line instead. Well, 0 would stay the same. The first piece would look like this, 1/10. The next part would look like this. I hope you can see that. Make sure you're watching in full screen. The next part would look like this. Then we have 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 10/10 or 1. So we can see that that dot for 4/10 is in the same place, whether it's a decimal or a fraction. Go ahead and turn the page to page 652, and then put your finger or pencil on the try it. Then, read in your head as I read out loud. Write 45 hundredths as a fraction with a denominator of 100. Well, first we're going to use a number line. I prefer grids over number lines, but we should still know how to use number lines. Well, we have both our decimal parts at the top and our fraction parts at the bottom. Instead of putting 100 little tick marks and labeling each one, what they did was they broke it into groups of 10. So here we have 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths, 40 hundredths, 50 hundredths, 60 hundredths, 70 hundredths, 80 hundredths, 90 hundredths, and then 100 hundredths, which is equal to 1. We know that 45 is going to be halfway between 40 and 50. So what that means is that 0.45 is the same as a fraction with a 45 as the numerator and a 100 as the denominator, because both mean 45 out of 100. I'm so sorry. Okay, so now let's look at the talk about it. So finger or pencil on the talk about it, and then read in your head while I read out loud. Number 1, shade the models below to show how 7/10 and 70 hundredths are equivalent. So we know, forgot about that from a minute ago. We know that 7/10 we would use a grid model for. And we would shade, a tenths grid for. And we would shade 7 out of the 10 equal pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7/10 right here. Now, if we wanted to shade 70 hundredths, we could go in and count and shade 70 of these little cubes at a time. But we also know that 70 is the same as 7 groups of 10. And we know that each of these columns has 10 in it. So if we shade 7 columns, then we would have 70 hundredths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And again, we know that 70 hundredths because we have 7 columns that are completely full, and then we're using 10 rows. 7 times 10 is 70. So this tenths grid shows 7/10, and this hundredths grid shows 70 hundredths. And we can look at them and see that we have shaded the same amount. I know the glare is in the way of this one, so you can't tell, but you did it in your book. So you can see there that 7/10 and 70 hundredths show the same amount of space. Now, if we were writing our decimal, we wouldn't write this way, but we just want to be able to see that 7/10 and 70/100 are the same. Now, number 2, write 2 fractions that represent the models in exercise 1. Well, if we look at this, we have 7 out of 10 shaded, so that means we have 7 parts out of 10 total parts, which means we have a numerator of 7 and a denominator of 10 to have 7/10. Now, to write a fraction for this, well, we have 70 out of 100 equal pieces shaded, so we have 70/100. I know something about 7/10 and 70/100. I know that they are equivalent because if I multiplied my numerator and denominator each by 10, I would get 70/100. So that's another way that we can see that these decimals are exactly the same. They show the same amount of space. Okay, number 3, explain how you could write 9/10 as a fraction with a denominator of 100 without using models. I just showed you. This is exactly what we did like 2 chapters ago when we were finding equivalent fractions. We would just take 9/10 and we would multiply the numerator and the denominator each by 10 to get 90/100. We're going to use that in, I think it's our next lesson, so keep that in mind. I think it is. Yep, we will be using that in our next lesson, so make sure that you don't forget this. Now, number 4, explain how you could write 78/100 as a fraction with a denominator of 100 without using models. Well, first we're just going to listen to that word, 78/100. We know as a decimal, it looks like a 0 in the ones place because I have no holes, then a decimal point, then I say the entire number after the decimal point, 78, and then I say the place the last digit is in, hundreds. I also know that if I say the word 78/100 as a fraction, it would look like this. A 78 in the numerator spot and a 100 in the decimal spot. I'm sorry, the denominator spot. I got my D words all confused. Because I say this decimal and this fraction the exact same way. 78/100, 78/100. So it's really very easy to figure out as long as I know how to say it in words. It is very easy to write it as both a decimal and a fraction. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to do numbers 5 and numbers 11 together. Yeah, we're going to do numbers 5 and number 11 on the guided practice together, and then you'll do, the independent practice, and then you'll do the rest on your own. Okay, so because of the glare on number 5, we're just going to do number 8 together instead. We're doing it the same exact way. You can just see number 8 a lot better. So, the directions for numbers 5 through 10 say write each decimal as a fraction with a denominator of 10, then shade the grid. Well, for number 8, we know that we say this 5/10. We know that the fraction, called 5/10, looks like a numerator of 5 and a denominator of 10. Because remember, we say this decimal and this fraction the exact same way. So a decimal of 5/10 looks like a fraction of 5/10. We know that 5/10, whether it's a decimal or a fraction, means 5 out of 10 equal pieces. We have a 10ths grid, which we already know is 10 equal pieces. So that means we have to shade 5 out of 10 of those pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to count them to make sure we did it correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 5/10 written in 3 different ways. Now for number 11, the directions for numbers 11 through 16 say write each decimal as a fraction with a denominator of 100, then shade the grid. Well, for number 11, we know that we say this as 39 hundredths. If we write the fraction that goes with 39 hundredths, it looks like a numerator of 39 and a denominator of 100. We know 39 hundredths, whether it's a decimal or a fraction, is the same as 39 out of 100 equal pieces. We have a hundredths grid, so that means we need to shade 39 out of those 100 pieces. We know that 39 has 3 groups of 10, so we're going to go ahead and shade 3 columns. 1, 2, 3, because we have our 3 in our tenths place, which means we shade 3 columns. And then we have 9 in our hundredths place, so that means we're going to shade 9 more of these little pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So now we have shaded 39 hundredths, and we have written 39 hundredths in 3 different ways. If you have any questions about today's lessons, make sure to Skype, FaceTime me, text, email, whatever, this afternoon. Go ahead and finish the rest of the independent practice right now. Numbers, we already know how to do numbers 5 through 16, numbers 17 through 20. Our word problems, you do not have to draw grids unless you'd like to, in which case just keep that extra sheet of paper with your book. All you have to do is write the answer, but make sure that you have a unit. Don't forget the units for any word problems. Number 21 says explain to a classmate. Obviously, unfortunately, you don't have a classmate there with you, but remember, even when we do this in class, you're thinking of your math book as your classmate. So you're going to write your explanation in words and numbers on that line. And then number 22 is a critical thinking question. Remember, that comes from your brain based on what we learned today and what you already know, and putting those together to form a brand new answer. For the homework, numbers 1 through 6 are exactly like what we did on page 653. Numbers 7 through 9, you're using this table to do word problems. So those are just like numbers 17 through 20. So make sure that you write your answer. You do not have to use grids. However, if you would like to, please do them on a separate sheet of paper and make sure to turn them in with your this homework page. Don't forget the unit. Use the correct unit, otherwise I will count off. So don't forget about the units. Okay. Go ahead, do the independent practice now, and then you can either do the math homework right after, or you can wait until later today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me in whatever way is easiest for you between 1 and 5 today. Or other times, if you really need help, you can text me and I'll let you know if I'm available. Okay, go ahead.